In month 9 of the beta, Mike Wilson was finally able to organize the first successful tournament on Pokemon TCG Live. Naturally, it was named after me and called Trust Your Feet. If you don't know why, you probably don't want to know why. Anyways, I entered the tournament with this boring old Giratina V-Star deck, which ran a 3-3 line of Giratina and a few other attackers. As you know from the title of this video, I ended up winning the tournament, but that's only part of the story. Because I didn't want to leak anything early, my stream started near the very end of Game 1. I faced off against Mew VMAX and it was a rough start for both of us. They started to Genesect and were only able to get a single Mew down turn 1, and I didn't fare any better. I started Greninja and Giratina and was forced to use Abyss Seeking. There isn't a person out there who thinks things are going well if they ever have to use Abyss Seeking. Despite that, between Colress and Abyss Seeking, I managed to play the game, but Comfey and VIP Pass eluded me. Not just in this game, but most of the tournament. I was forced to use Star Requiem early on a Mew VMAX, putting myself in a good position. Unfortunately, the slow start caught up to me. They got a full bench and put Oricorio down, which really screwed me up. Now, instead of doing 310 damage to a Mew VMAX with a Choice Ball detached, I maxed out at 290. A Zigzagoon and Scoop Up Net could have fixed the math, but again, terrible start. Between whiffing literally everything and them always having a Gust card towards the end of the match, I started the tournament with a loss. Honestly, I wasn't too bummed. Winning isn't what truly matters, right? Wrong, only losers say that. Game 2 is where I hunkered down and unlocked all of my brain power. Just kidding, my opponent never showed up. Here's where I'll talk a bit about the tournament as a whole. Mike did a great job and everything ran smoothly on his end, but there were still some issues. Firstly, some of the players thought this was taking place in PTCGL. The image and description clearly stated this was a live tournament, but a surprising number weren't aware of that fact. Secondly, because live is such a well-made game, you have to restart the client after accepting any friend request, otherwise your opponent won't show up. So literally every round I had to reboot the game. Luckily, we knew this ahead of time, so it was a simple case of warning people. Overall, aside from a few issues on live side, the whole thing went incredibly well. Now, on to Game 3, where my opponent did show up. They were running Palkia V-Star. If you remember my deck list, you'll know that a certain bench protecting card is missing. So I was definitely on edge. Fortunately, Giratina can one-shot a Palkia, and if I played correctly, they couldn't get a revenge KO. Well, I played perfectly. With a gigantic hand at my disposal, I decided to forego knocking out a Palkia V with the Giratina V-Star, and instead I bossed up their Drizzile. It was a risky play, but based on each other's board positions, they couldn't get a revenge knockout, especially if they couldn't get a Shady Dealings Inteleon into play. I should also mention that this was another game where I started Giratina and Greninja. Despite having 4 Comfey and 4 VIP Pass in the deck, they decided to never show up. Despite taking an early 3-prize lead, victory wasn't assured. A backup Giratina was impossible to find even with a 14-card hand. But I was still able to Sableye knock out their Sobble and limit my bench so my lone Giratina V would be protected. From that point on, I just used Star Requiem for game. Now 2-1, I entered Game 4. Zoroark isn't the easiest matchup in the world for Giratina. We one-shot each other normally, but they played Radiant Gardevoir and Big Charm, moving them out of KO range of my Giratina. Here's where I'll admit to getting lucky. I went first, had a decent start, and all they were able to muster was a Crobat V and an energy attachment on their first turn. Their second turn wasn't much better. They were able to retreat the Crobat and get Diancie into the active, but still no Zoroark. Eventually their board position stabilized, though it was too late. Even with a Big Charm on the Crobat V buying them an extra turn, I was able to build up my Lost Zone and ultimately won the battle. While it may have seemed easy, Zoroark is still scary for Giratina. Heading into round 5, I was 3-1. I still had a small chance to win the tournament, but there was currently an unbeaten player, Trey Tack, at 4-0. And wouldn't you know it, I was matched against them. Despite my initial worries, everyone was telling me Giratina was a free win versus Blissey. Well, I told them I'd prove them wrong and lose the game. Even with the Lost Zone trying to screw me over as much as possible, I had a good start in Game 5. Cramorant was able to get an early hit on a Blissey, which is absolutely key since it makes a Giratina V-Star KO much easier. Plus, their Blissey could only do 100 damage to my Cramorant the following turn, meaning it survived. Honestly, Cramorant came up clutch this entire game. 3-shotting a Blissey might not sound exciting, but it was huge. 2 Cramorant were able to take down 1 Blissey, removing all energy from their side of the field in the process. Cramorant was also my answer to their Miltank the following turn. Finally, after another Cramorant hit, Giratina V-Star was able to seal the win. This meant there were 4 players at 4-1 going into the 6th and final round. Before I talk about the final battle, I do need to mention something. The way Limitless handles online tournaments is that you can see your opponent's list. It's to help eliminate any shenanigans. So, I wasn't excited when I saw Regigigas. Giratina doesn't play Avery or really any strong way of dealing with them. The strategy is to just use Giratina V's Shred to take knockouts and basically hope for the best. Well, the best happened early. Although I had a horrible first turn, unable to even launch a Cramorant attack, my opponent's was worse. They had to ditch 2 Ordinary Rod. Looking at their list, they only had 3 total. This meant I could win by simply knocking out the right Reggie. While things weren't going well for my opponent, I was prepping my Radiant Greninja to deal 90 damage to 2 Reggies, all while having 2 Cramorant in play ready to just mess them up. And this is where my greatest moment of the tournament happened. Regieleki was truly their greatest threat since I couldn't protect my bench, so I bossed it up, pinged it with Zigzagoon, and knocked it out with Cramorant. By continuing to take the right knockouts at the right time, I put myself in a commanding position, ultimately winning the game and going 5-1 in the tournament. I learned afterwards that the Reggie player prized some key Pokemon, and I'll also mention that despite me running Temple of Sinnoh, it never played a significant role, like at all through the tournament. Honestly, I think another Dustbuster would have been better to bump all of the big charms and capes of toughness, rather than trying to shut off special energy. After winning my final battle, it was a waiting game. Since there was no top cut, it all came down to opponent win percentage. The other 6th round match saw Treytac versus Jacob. As we know, Treytac was playing Blissey Miltank while Jacob was running Zoroark. If Treytac won, I'd place second despite having the tiebreaker. If Jacob won, I'd take the whole thing. Well, if it wasn't for Zoroark playing 3 copies of Canceling Cologne and smelling so wonderful, Blissey would have taken it. But Jacob ended up winning the game, giving me first place. I swear I won't let the fact that I'm the greatest PTCGL player in history go to my head. If you think this tournament was rigged, why not battle me in the next one? Trust Your Feet number 2 takes place on Tuesday, November 15th, where Silver Tempest will be legal. The more players, the better, and with the live beta expected to launch globally later this month, you could face people from all around the world. One more thing before I go, somebody actually played this deck in the tournament. Yeah, they went 0-1 and immediately dropped.